What's up guys, Jay's 2 cents here, and one of the things that we always do around here is we do react series to different people's setups, where you guys will submit your setup photos and we critique it. Sometimes we say nice things, sometimes we're not so nice, and you guys always push us to roast people, and I feel bad roasting people. But today's is different. Today, I am going to be responding to and or giving react stuff to other popular YouTubers' setups. So this should be fun.
Reactions?
React stuff. Viewsonic is proud to announce their all-new Elite XG32OU gaming monitor. The XG32OU features a 4K 32-inch display with a 1 millisecond response time and 150 Hz refresh rate, and builds upon Viewsonic's revered Elite panel lineup. The Viewsonic Elite series monitors feature clean aesthetic design that blend well with any setup, whether it be professional or personal, due to their sleek design and tasteful lighting. To learn more about Viewsonic's gaming monitors, or to see their full lineup of monitors, click the link in the description below. I'm gonna preface this with the same thing I had to tell Phil like 3 different times. This is not a roast, although it will probably devolve into a roast at some point. But I have no doubt there's gonna be some responses maybe, and it's kind of difficult to choose which content creators to respond to, or react to. There are so many great content creators out there, both big and small. So I just took some of the, what I consider to be some of the headliners when it comes to tech videos, specifically PC tech videos. I mean, I should definitely preface that, because there are different branches of tech, right? There's mainstream, there's lifestyle, there's mobile tech, there's Apple. I did not cast a wide net. I basically just said, let's talk about our peers in this particular space and genre that we are in. We can't talk about PC tech YouTubers and not talk about Linus. Obviously, we're talking about Linus from Linus Tech Tips. He's always shared his home setups, and whether it be a streaming setup, a gaming setup, he's always shown it. Now, it's kind of interesting because he's currently in the middle of moving into a new home that was actually, I believe it was a scratch build. It may not have been a scratch build, it means built from the ground up. But I can tell you that his most recent videos about his streaming setup were specifically in what looks to be like a basement kind of a conversion. And because he's using a green screen and he's actually got no sheetrock or drywall up yet, just studs, it's not fair to critique that setup because it's clearly still in the works. Now, the one I'm gonna critique here is his old setup from his previous home. And one thing you might notice in this photo right here is it might seem unfair that I'm going to rip him right away for the cable management because of the fact that it is clearly a video about his setup in progress back then. He did call out in this video that he's not cable managing it. So that's the first thing I've got to mention here. Like, the cable management on this is absolutely awful. I mean, we've got wires just dangling behind his Elgato stands. Now here's the thing. Not only is he eccentric and very hyperactive, he is very much a function over form kind of guy. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you are comfortable in your setup, there's nothing wrong with being a function over form. But at the same time, it opens yourself up to, criticisms, I guess, if you will. The reason why streaming setups are interesting is because of the fact that only you are seeing the setup. Right, your audience is seeing what's happening behind you, which is why I'm really disappointed that that's what the audience saw behind him there. A bunch of closet doors. I mean, it might sound like I'm saying it's unfortunate that they see Linus in this particular angle, but there's nothing happening behind you. Now, his new setup, he's using the Elgato green screen. He pulls it up and green screen cut out your head. And as much as that's become super popular, that's not something I plan on doing. I don't like that. I think it's more interesting to see something going on behind the person that's live streaming or whatever. It's definitely one of those things that it's really boring what's going on behind him there. Now, he is using a DSLR camera for this. It looks like he's using a Canon camera with L-glass. I personally feel like that's extreme overkill. I feel like that's more of a flex thing, especially with how good webcams like the Elgato Facecam are. You get ISO control, you get depth of field control, or your f-stop control, which can give you very DSLR looking quality when you're that big on the screen, because you always put yourself down in the corner, and maybe if you go full screen talking head, just chatting, I feel like DSLRs just add unnecessary complication when it comes to wire management, when it comes to power management, when it comes to interfacing. You've got to have a capture card, you've got to have capture card software to deal with just your cam, you've got to have power cable, you've got to have obviously an entirely different mount system for it. I personally think it's just a flex to do that, and it's entirely unnecessary. There's just another photo here of what's going on underneath his desk. I could personally never, ever work in a situation like that because of the simple fact that my OCD when it comes to cable management would never allow me to be able to be comfortable in that kind of space. But if it works for him, great. So moving on, we're gonna move over to Paul's hardware. Paul is my favorite fuzzy guy in tech. You can see it's currently Christmas, so he's got a Christmas tree going on behind him. Paul's setup is interesting. I've been to his place many times. I've done some videos with him at his place, and he's got one of the most unique sets, if you will. Now, he doesn't game per se in this set unless maybe he's live streaming. He does have a different room that has a gaming setup in there. Again, that's very much a functional reform type of setup, although it is nice. He doesn't really share that setup very much. So we only get to see what's happening here with his setup that he's created in his garage. But I can tell you right now, he's done overhead rigging so that his microphones are actually above him and he can pull them down. They're on arms and move them where he wants. He's got more than one mic because of when they were doing awesome hardware, their live stream, which they're not doing anymore, unfortunately. But that way, if he has another person in his set, he can pull a mic down. His lighting is overhead. All of his cable management and wiring and power is all overhead. And he's got this U-shaped desk that he built from scratch that, to be honest, is a little bit of inspiration for some of the ways that I've done my setup in my game room, which we'll talk about in a minute here. But he's got multiple setups and test beds going here at the same time. He's got floating shelves that he's got some of his favorite either knickknacks, props, pop culture stuff. He's obviously got a lightsaber back there that appears to be Darth Vader's lightsaber. I believe I have the exact same one. And it's a very warm, comforting setup. I mean, this setup is iconic. You look at it and you're like, this is Paul's hardware setup. It's not exactly the most tidy setup, if you will, because it's a working space. Just like our entire warehouse is destroyed most of the time here when we're working because, again, it's a functional working setup that gets destroyed every time you do a project and then you gotta clean it and restart. Whereas a dedicated gaming area that you go and you sit down at and you play games, that's all you do there, is much easier to keep tidy when you're not unboxing things and having packaging everywhere and you're in the middle of projects and builds. I wish that we had some more angles of Paul's build here. It's not exactly, he doesn't really flip the camera around the other way too often. You've seen in his videos, he films from different angles. But the cool thing about the way he did his setup, even though it's technically only 2 walls in his garage, is he's got about a 45-degree angle he can film and remain in that set, which is pretty neat. And he's got a floating on-wheel workbench that he moves around to do all his builds on. Although not technically a setup, it's still a very well put together set that I thought was definitely worth sharing. We're gonna move on now to Hardware Canucks. And the reason why I'm moving on to Hardware Canucks is because of the fact that they, again, they are not in the same building. You've got Dimitri, you've got Eber, you've got Mike, and they're in 3 different locations. So what I'm actually gonna be taking a look at here is, because they mostly work out of their homes, as far as I understand, their setups are also their backdrops for their set. So that's the way most of us have done it. A lot of us are still doing that in the past. In fact, during the pandemic, I filmed from home again, and that was my setup. That was my set. That was the way we did it. I chose to show Hardware Canucks because there's one thing that they are extremely known for, which is being the absolute most creative and beautiful videos that you will ever see on the tech YouTube sphere. Dimitri and Eber and Mike put so much effort into their videography and their lighting and their setup that I often find myself like becoming distracted with what they're saying by just staring at the background and having to continue to rewind to hear what they're saying because of the fact I'm like, how'd they do that light? What's that reflection right there? What is that weird bounce effect? Because I guarantee you there is no bounce of light in any of Dimitri, Eber's, or even Mike's shots that are not planned out. So this is Dimitri's setup right here. You can see he's got the Corsair 1. Again, the awesome thing about RGB, color coordinated, right? So he's got these nice dark walls, which make it already feel warm. He's got very warm lighting. The skin tones are obviously very warm. He's got just the right mix of studio light and natural light coming in through the window. Obviously, he's got a guitar back there, so I'm a fan of that already. He's got what appears to be like a wood tone keyboard, nice warm orange lighting. I mean, look at the hair light. Have you ever seen hair look so good? And I don't mean the style, I just mean the color and the way it's lit. Dimitri is not unique to Hardware Canucks in this style. If you take a look at Eber, again, a different style, more of a studio type style in terms of lighting, where Dimitri is using a lot of natural light, Eber is using all artificial light, but again, this setup is absolutely, there's no lack to it. Now, you can see in the background here, it looks like he's using curtains. I'm not sure if that's a partition curtain, maybe to partition off the rest of the room, or if those are curtains hanging against a wall. He's got a little light stand behind him that's lighting upward, but it's bouncing enough light back at him so he's getting some edge lighting on the side of his face, and the skin tones look really natural, and it's not blowing out at the camera. So I know this has turned a little bit more into like their style review, but again, these are their working setups. They work from these same setups you're seeing in the background. If you take a look at Mike's setup here, you can see it's a little bit more basic versus the other guys. But as you can see, again, very well thought out in terms of the lighting, the skin tones, the warm tones. So we got a lot of wood warm tones happening here in the speakers. Obviously this is a Noctua video, so we got lots of browns sort of happening here. One thing that kind of shocks me a little bit though, if we go and we look at Dimitri's setup again, you can see some wiring here coming out from the bottom of the stand for the monitor, which I feel like those could have easily been bundled up, and instead of looking like 3 or 4 wires kind of going different ways, to be honest, I'm surprised that that's not bundled a little tighter. Dimitri's setup, the only cable that I can see is a keyboard wire. I feel like Mike has to do a little bit of work here in his setup where on the right side speaker, you can't see any wiring. But on the left side speaker, we can see definitely our audio cable, our power cable. It looks like another cable going to something maybe sitting on top of it. And then we got one cable hanging down right here underneath his elbow towards that light on the floor. That's the only like critique I could possibly give these guys, is literally like the most nitpicky thing. To be like, I can see 2 cables for about 3 inches, you need to fix that, especially when I started this off with Linus's flying spaghetti monster. So anyway, I would be doing a disservice if I did not include Hardware Canucks for the amount of work and effort they put into these types of videos. So that not only are you getting great content, you're looking at great produced content as well. Let's move on to Edgar. So the next couple of YouTubers that we're gonna do are specific setup YouTubers. What I mean by that is they're YouTubers that have definitely built a name on doing this exact thing, critiquing people's setups, giving advice, building their own setup, giving how-tos, showing you some of the tips and tricks to get better looking setups, cable management and all that sort of stuff. And this is Edgar's setup here, which is his personal setup. In fact, if you look at his setup, if it wasn't for the nanoleafs, it would be extremely basic. Guys like Edgar and the next YouTuber we'll talk about in a second, they've really pioneered some of the hacks, if you will, or at least made them popular and well known. I don't know if they pioneered them, let alone really showed them off. And that's by doing things like getting furniture feet to raise up speaker stands or to raise up monitor stands or to create a platform on your desk to put things under. The floating shelves, you know, the IKEA floating shelf type thing. I mean, that's 30 bucks. You can have a huge collection. I've got them in my studio, or not my studio, but my home setup. And they allow you to do things like put your favorite pop culture stuff on here. He's clearly in to Dragon Ball Z. I wanted to say Dragon Balls just to piss people off, but I won't do that. Not my cup of tea. Definitely not my cup of tea. I'm very boomer when it comes to anime. I don't get it. I don't like it. To each their own. A little too anime for me. But what I want to show here is the efforts that obviously he went through with the cable management, because you cannot be a setup critiquer and have poor cable management. I mean, that's just like trusting a skinny chef or a fat personal trainer. You just don't do that, right? So anyway, you can see the mess he initially has here underneath his desk. Had to get everything sort of in their place and wired up so you can see what the slack is that you have to deal with. And this is how he dealt with it. So he got a lot of double-sided tape, screwed a lot of stuff to the bottom side of the desk, has a lot of those double-sided sticky tape cable management, like Velcro type straps underneath the desk. Those might actually be, instead of Velcro, there might actually be the plastic clips that interconnect. But what he's done now is he's created these channels underneath his desk so everything is wired neatly. The only thing that concerns me about them being under the middle of the desk is I've met Edgar. He's a tall guy like myself, at least 6 foot tall. My knees often hit underneath the desk. And I've done that in the past. And I've actually unplugged stuff before, because when I game, I get a little animated sometimes, and I've hit like that underneath the desk and unplugged something. Or, and all I did was lean back and my knee came up and I hit the desk. I've also am a passionate gamer, and I get mad and I'll hit the desk like that sometimes. And I've had my plugs just unplug, just fall out of the power strips because they're hanging straight down. My current setup is like that, but they're off to the sides and I've got to hit the desk really hard to make them fall. It's only happened once. That's a personal thing of mine, that I wouldn't personally put them in the center like that. But the important thing about cable management is being able to trace the wires that you need if you have to change a wire, unplug something, service something. If you just take all the bundle and just like clump it up and straighten it out and zip tie it all up, if you go to take that one component out, you've got to take out all the wiring and let it all down. As you can see, he's clearly gone from that major mess underneath the desk to a nice clean setup. I mean, he even went through the effort of painting his, I believe that's a Rode PS1 stand. I could be wrong, but it looks similar to mine. He even painted his Shure SM7B white to match the setup. Same thing with his camera arm. So it looks like he's got an articulating camera arm, but if I had to make any sort of critique here, I'm not entirely sure what it would be. So his nanoleaf wires are hanging down. Like they are stuck to the wall, but they're coming straight down off the wall. You can't really see them because they're behind the monitors. You can sort of see it between the gap of the two monitors. You can see the 3 cables hanging down right there. The setup to me is odd only in the sense that he's got one monitor facing down and ultra wide. Well, you'd have to look down to see it. He's got one monitor above it. I'm not sure which his primary monitor is. I didn't actually watch the setup video. I'm just looking at the photos here. I'm not sure if he uses the primary monitor, which is 16:9, which to me makes sense because if you want to have the best streaming setup, then 16:9 is the most supported format when it comes to setting things up. But I mean, the 21:9 would be perfect for your monitoring stuff like your Elgato, maybe your OBS. You got Stream Elements or something like that going so that you can keep an eye on your notifications and stuff. There's really not a whole lot I can say regarding critique. It's a nice, clean, well thought out setup. I'm kind of wondering how the reverb is in there, considering I don't see any bass traps or any sort of reflection material on the wall to stop any sort of reverb. Now, obviously he's aware of that. I'm sure he's handled it or has handled it since this photo, but I'm not sure how he handled that. Moving on though, I did mention multiple setup reviewers here. And the second one we're gonna take a look at here is RandomFrankP. RandomFrankP, and I gave him this credit in my video where I did my home setup, is 100% absolutely where I got the idea of using the furniture feet to raise up the IKEA countertop to make space between the Alex drawers and the top. It has become like the most overdone, overused, but functional desk setup that you can do. I guarantee for the price of the 2 Alex drawers, the Amazon furniture feet, the Carlby top, is the biggest setup you can get for desk space and the most cost effective if you compare the cost of desks for anything that gets near that size. You can't get anywhere near that size unless you start shopping like dining room tables. So I 100% utilized this inspiration from him when I saw the first time he set this up when I did my own home setup. He's using 3 ultra-wide monitors. He's got 2 on the bottom, 1 on the top. And it's funny because it looks like they're floating. If you look at this other picture here, that's kind of a downward angle, you can see they look like they're floating, but if you look between the right monitor and the tower, he's got a cable channel. Very similar to what we showed you when we were doing the Scholars Collective live stream setup when I was bringing the cables along the wall. I didn't want them to be visible because it was a bright yellow extension cord. You can see there that it blends in really well to the white wall, especially when he has lighting bouncing off the wall from the back of the desk. It really sort of just blends into it. I'm a little surprised though, to be honest, that he's got an exposed power strip right by his feet that is not entirely the most cable managed. And if we look at this other picture to the right of his setup where he's got his keyboards on display, you can see a lot of wires sort of happening down there. He's got a power strip that looks like it's double-sided tape to the side of the Alex drawers. But I'm really sort of surprised that that amount of cable mess is visible, as well as what's hanging off the backside of the tower. This is unfortunately the downside of having a setup that's mid-wall without being like near a corner or something where you can hide that sort of stuff. I'm not sure if this is a living room or a basement. I think it might be a basement. If so, living in California has me extremely jealous because we don't have basements here and I would love this much space to kind of do with what I want. I'm just a little surprised that that amount of cable management mess is still visible there. Granted, this is the backdrop for his videos. You can't see it. Again, good use of bokeh and it's all out of focus. In fact, it's not even in shots. Like obviously his white Herman Miller chair, very quintessential stuff. Recommendations, I mean, it looks like he has enough space behind that right Alex drawer to maybe be able to hide that power strip behind it. But again, I'm not sure why. Okay, so this of course is Kyle Bitwit, his setup here. This is a setup that he did at his studio. I have no idea what his home setup is. He had this setup built, well, he did this setup obviously like mid this year. And it's interesting because it's the only one so far that has a floating PC wall mount. Wall-mounted PCs are something I've been asked to do a million times. I just don't have a wall to mount it to. I don't really want to mount it to the wall. But he has a unique situation here where this wall coming out right there only comes out about what, 3/4 of the room, maybe half the room. And on the other side of it is where his like storage area is, and he can just walk to the other side. If he needs to drill holes through and drop wires, it's a lot easier to do it in this kind of wall than at home, because this is a commercial grade wall, which means it has metal studs and they're not wood and there's no cross pieces going through there. He can drop the cables, as you can see right here. He's got this pass through with a plug and whatnot. Doesn't have to drill any holes halfway and go through a stud. He can just drop it through. So it's kind of unique in that he can hide all the wires, which is why it looks so freaking clean like this. Now, in terms of his setup, he's got 3 16:9 panels, which is something I'm thinking about going back to and getting rid of my 21:9. Or I keep going 21:9. It's not, it's wider than that because it's 3840 by 1600. I digress. I think just going back to a standard panel type setup will make it simpler for live streaming and such. He again is using a DSLR for live streaming, but he's got all 3 of these arms on articulating monitor arms. So they're floating off the desk, which gives you freedom to put stuff underneath the monitors. He's got his amp, his DAC there. He's obviously got his Stream Deck there, but it's extremely clean and simple. If we take a look underneath the desk, he did something very similar to what TechSource did, was by having everything mounted underneath, hanging down. And then he's got cable tracks that are much wider than standard so that you can just pinch them and pull them out, get to any of the cables that you need to remove them, put the little cable channel back up. But it's very difficult for me to give him any sort of critique here. I mean, he's got a shotgun mic that he's using for his mic. That way it can stay out of frame, but pick him up nice and clearly. And as long as the reverb in the room is handled, that won't be a problem whatsoever. And you know his actual shooting set is behind him. So he's got a lot of stuff happening in that room to deaden sound already because he films in that room all his videos. The only thing that I find kind of odd here is how high his speakers are mounted. Now I know he addressed this in his video. I can't remember what his exact reasoning for that was. In fact, the first time Phil saw this, he was like, I didn't realize Kyle's ears were 6 feet off the ground when he's sitting. Whatever, that's where the speakers ended up. I think it had something to do with being along the same plane as the computer maybe. If he's doing a lot of gaming and stuff, I bet you for the most part, he's using headphones anyway, which means it won't matter how high they are. In fact, that's one of the reasons why with my setup, I ended up getting rid of my Yamaha studio monitors and actually gave them to Phil. And I am using a soundbar because I wanted the space back without having the big studio monitors on the side, considering the fact I never really used them. Speaking of my setup, why don't we go ahead and take a look at it? I've got multiple extension cords running to the very left side over here. Well, one extension cord. You can see the channel right there on the wall that's painted to match the wall. That's coming from a plug on the left side of the room. And then I've got a plug coming from the right side of the room, which you can't see that's hidden behind the subwoofer here, but you can see the one plug for the subwoofer that's supplying power to the PC power strip. So all the peripherals, the monitors, any of the speakers, that sort of stuff is, in this case I'm using a soundbar, which is already like the ultimate no-no when it comes to any sort of audio file. I don't care, it's a PC setup, I'm not watching movies there. I use my DevTech 9000 if I wanna watch movies in my specific movie watching area of the house. I don't have any of that power coming from the same power plug. I'm gonna be changing some stuff with my setup because the more that I look at these other setups, and I'm kind of tired of saying the word setup now, I feel like mine is just elements pulled from other people's builds, which is what a lot of us do. But I've got the RandomFrankP, Alex Drawers, Furniture Foot, Carl B. Top. I've got the 21:9, or actually 21:10, technically, I believe. It's a 3840 by 1600. It's a 4K wide, ultra wide, but it's 1600 tall, not 1440. With my 27-inch Elite Viewsonic panel on the left. Yes, I am aware they're not matched. People point that out to me all the time because I made comments in the past about matching your monitors. This is one of the reasons why I'm thinking about actually ditching the ultra wide and going back to 16:9 main and auxiliary panels for this very reason, because of the fact that when it comes to capturing 21:9 or whatever odd aspect ratio, there's just a lot of finesse that has to happen to get some of these streams that I do to work properly. What you can't see in this video that I do have now is a couple extra things. I've got an Elgato Stream Deck XL under the left monitor. I've got the key light from Elgato, and then I've got the Elgato face cam that replaced my Logitech Studio Cam that I absolutely hate. But I want to get rid of these floating shelves, and I want to end up doing some sort of an accent wall, whether it be textured, like hexagons or wallpapers or something. I want to put some extra sound material there so that you're not hearing the sound reverb nearly as much, although the Shure SM7B does a fantastic job at getting rid of any sort of reverb. Because it's a dynamic mic, you gotta get real close to it, which makes any of the distant sound and reverb usually not get picked up by the mic. You can see I've got my gesture chair. This is the one, remember I did our gesture video from Steelcase where I said I bought the chair and I've had it for months, and we ended up taking a sponsorship with them because of how much I love the chair. There's the chair I talked about. I'm not a fan of the subwoofer location. It is a subwoofer and it's hooked up to my PC, and I just put it next to where I had a plug. But a lot of people have commented like, why do you have two Alex drawers here and how do you even access them? The Alex drawers really do nothing more than prop up the desk. I don't have a lot of stuff in those drawers at all. But I am thinking about replacing the two single Alex drawers with a single double wide Alex drawer that's twice as wide on the drawers and makes more sense. I'm also kind of quickly becoming not a fan of the white. I've watched so many videos of people with dark tones. They've got wood tones, they've got dark colored walls. And I'm kind of missing that feel, and I'm feeling like going back to that. I had originally put these nano leafs on the right there, because they were additional key light that was helping to light me during live streams. Now that I actually have the key lights from Elgato, I don't need those anymore, which means I could move those. But if you look at my right setup here, because I've got an L-shaped desk where I basically have two of the tops that are bracketed together and very solid. On the right here on the wall, I've just got some of my favorite memorabilia. So I've got my father's Navy retirement flag right here. That's obviously on display, giving honor to him. I've got my 100,000 subscriber for this channel plaque, 100,000 for the car channel, the 1 million for the, and it's funny, mine looks silver, but I promise it's gold. But anyway, my 1 million for Jay's 2 cents, a signed script from The Office that was given to me by my best friend for my birthday. So some really cool stuff happening there. But again, to me, the more I look at it, with the model ships and the floating shells and the stuff on the wall, and it just feels like random stuff. And I kind of want to tie it together more to make it seem a little bit less like, you know, I just pulled elements out of thin air and it doesn't really flow. It's a nice setup, but it just doesn't flow right. I don't know. It looks like a man-child's build, which is exactly how it went. Anyway, to the left here, what you can't see is my racing sim with the VR setup. And I'm not sure I want to keep that in that spot. And what's happening behind me in the room here, if you guys haven't seen that video, is I have a couch with a love seat or a ottoman and a C9 LG OLED TV and all that sort of stuff. So what suggestions do you guys feel I should do with this? Like I said, I want to get rid of the floating shelves. I want to put some sound dampening, not dampening, but reverb dampening material on the walls here to catch reflections. Thinking about texturing the wall. I love the way the hexagons look. It's funny because I'm one of those people that gets really uncomfortable around really busy shapes and patterns, but I feel like if it's done right and it's subtle, it'll add some more depth to the room, but it won't make me feel weird or uncomfortable, if you will. Then I can get rid of the cliche product boxes that are all on that top shelf, and then the model ships on the middle shelf, and actually get those in glass cases and somewhere else where that way they don't get damaged, because I can't even tell you how many hours are represented in those two ships alone. So anyway, that's my setup. I want to redo it. You guys can give me some suggestions down in the comments below, and comment who has your favorite setup. I actually feel like Kyle might win this one in terms of who has the favorite YouTuber setup, because of the, well, I guess the freedom that he had in that space to be able to go through the walls and stuff and not have to worry about studs and whatnot. But the only stud you have to worry about is this one right here. Okay. Guys, it's 31 days of Techmas starting literally like tomorrow or whenever this video is going live. So we would greatly appreciate it if you guys showed your support by checking out the videos, coming to our channel daily and seeing what we upload. You can't count on YouTube's bell icon to work. It doesn't work. Notifications don't work. YouTube doesn't care whether or not you get any notifications. We have to count on you guys to manually come to the channel, and hopefully you guys will like what you see. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.